Welcome to Call to the Bullpen, where business leaders get the insights they need to make the right calls. I'm Jason Carballo.
And I'm Clint Overton.
And I'm Ted Stan.
Today, we're examining a strategic leadership model that's increasingly relevant in growth stage businesses, the use of interim or fractional executives as a bridge. Specifically, how experienced leadership can step in to drive near-term priorities while simultaneously developing junior talent to take the reins over time. Well, good morning, Clint. Good morning, Ted. How are you all today?
Doing great.
Good morning.
This is a topic that was recommended to us by Clint. So I'll start off with the first question to Clint. Clint, what did you mean by strategic leadership as a bridge, and why is this more relevant than ever in today's scaling environment?
I think one of the things that we have seen pretty predominantly over at least for me, the last few years, and I think Ted certainly has experience that can go back a bit further, just in terms of the client profile that we're working with, is that companies have a tendency during significant transformation to do what they think is right, I think, at the time, but it really is kind of a cutting a corner exercise. And they have a tendency to do one of two things. They either dramatically underhire or over promote when they recognize that there's a specific area of expertise that requires more strategic leadership in the organization. And what I mean by that is kind of a couple scenarios. So one is the decision to take somebody who is in kind of a mid-level role, put them in a role that is intended to be an executive role in the organization to help them move forward strategically when they're not really ready to do that. So there's no one in the organization who has the background and expertise in that specific discipline. The person has demonstrated some promise in terms of tactical execution, but there's a real need to move the organization forward strategically. And because of the loyalty to that individual, there's a decision often made to change the title of that person, give them a little bit more money, but then have this expectation that they can make a significant jump in terms of actually propelling the organization forward. That's the over promotion example. The under hiring example is the fact that there is a concern about the investment required in order to get somebody into that seat. So there's recognition that they need somebody more strategic. There's a more significant need to have in executive leadership in a specific discipline. And because of the budget of the organization, they go out to market, they try to hire a specific role, and they do that with a salary range that's really more the level below that specific role that they're recruiting for. And as a result, they have high expectations because of the title that they're going after, but they ultimately get somebody who is not really of the ilk, talent, strategic capabilities that they're looking for, because of the fact that they have gone about it in a way to save money as opposed to finding the right fit to help the organization propel.
And I think Clint makes some good points there. What we're suggesting is not that people can't level up. Ultimately, people can level up. What I would look at, though, is, when Clint talks about the over promotion, is it someone that can actually fill that role? Is it someone that is coachable so that they can be leveled up? I think the concern and what we've seen in the marketplace is you have an individual that takes over that role. Really what they're doing is the same job they were doing previously. They miss the strategic piece. They continue to execute. And that's ultimately what your executive team should be doing for you.
Yeah. And just to add to that, Jason, I gave kind of a little bit of the backstory of the use case examples of where bridge leadership is necessary. So I didn't get into specifically what bridge leadership looks like. But what we're seeing is really capable solutions out there in the marketplace to bring a very experienced executive into the organization who's really able to do two fundamentally important things in the scenarios that I just described before. So instead of over promoting somebody who's not necessarily ready, or having somebody in your stable that you want to cultivate, but then bringing in somebody who's also not capable of really helping develop them nor help the organization move forward strategically, is to bring a super experienced executive, been there, done that individual into your business and allow them to do two things immediately through the fractional model of providing the strategic leadership and guidance the organization needs here and now to move the ball down the field. And then also start to cultivate and develop that talent one level down, giving the organization the opportunity to execute in the here and now, but also cultivate that leader for the future who can then step into that role 12, 18, 24 months from now. And you don't miss a beat along the way, and you don't put yourself in a position where you're not able to develop the talent in your organization that you're loyal to, who you really want to help be part of the future of the business.
Ted, from your work inside growth stage companies, what are the most common leadership gaps that stall momentum?
So, I guess there's really two areas that I look at. What I would say is, generally speaking, the last place that the executive team is looking to hire is on the finance and accounting side of it. So ultimately the CFO position. The other one that I see out there is CRO, Senior VP of Sales. So, when you talk about strategic advice, if you have a CFO that has cut his teeth, he's going to be looking, what do the next 13 weeks look like from a cash flow standpoint? How are we altering what we put out at the beginning of the year from a financial standpoint, specifically income statement standpoint, sales standpoint? How are we making adjustments to that? From a CRO standpoint, are we hitting our targets? How are we making adjustments? Are we talking to the CFO? Are we talking to the COO? Are we talking to the CEO of the company? So those are the two big gaps that I historically see. Not to say that there aren't others, but generally CFO is the last that's addressed. CRO, again, I think is up there as well.
Clint, can you walk us through a real world example where the bullpen model transformed a business's trajectory?
I can, and specifically the strategic leadership as a bridge example for us. A client, $120 million business, a little over 100 years old. And so you'd think that Fractional wouldn't necessarily be a great fit for that type of organization. And kind of the specific example that we had here was a full-time CFO had left the organization. There were some fairly significant deficiencies in the banking relationship that was in place. There was really a need for a restructuring and retooling of the accounting team, and really making sure that the right people were in the right seats in order to kind of go forward and start to build the foundation for strategic vision of the next chapter of the organization. And there is a leader in the finance team who's been with them for, I believe, about 10 years that they wanted to invest in to become the future CFO of the organization. And so hiring a full-time person didn't make sense because of the fact that that would have restricted this person from ascending into the CFO seat. Immediate needs to go out and build a new banking relationship, rebuild the accounting team, get the right people in the right seats, and then also start to develop that person to ascend into that seat. And so we're just under 12 months into that with the organization. Have had the opportunity to redesign the accounting team, had an opportunity to put some people into some new roles, have been through now the process of moving to a new banking relationship that's going to be less restrictive for the organization's success, and then have really started to make some significant progress in the development of that experienced finance leader in the organization to really put them in a position so that in the coming 12 months, they're going to be in a much better position to really take the reins as the CFO, the future CFO of the organization. And so I use that example for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, is it fits the discussion today, but it also fits really where we see Fractional being such a significant bridge for the success of an organization and ensuring that the business can continue to keep momentum, not make short-term decisions that ultimately restrict the capability of the organization to move fast, move furious, and move in the direction of the strategic vision of the organization. The feedback that we've gotten from the president and COO of that organization has been significant in terms of their gratitude for what we were able to do. They had been through a number of full-time CFOs and then really recognized the fact that they wanted to invest in this person. We gave them a capability to do that. And we're seeing really significant payoffs from that so far.
Ted, in an example like that, how do you ensure the work isn't just a stopgap, but really sets up the junior leadership team for sustained success, especially after you roll off or potentially will roll off?
I think that goes to the philosophy of really why we started Boardroom Bullpen. Again, one of the things that we don't consider ourselves as consultants. Ultimately, what we're looking to do for a company is provide that executive leadership until such time as they need someone to step in full time. So we don't really look at assignments, whether, whatever executive that we are doing an assessment for, and ultimately providing to a company. Our goal is not to come in, get a work product done, drop the bag, and then walk out. Ultimately, what we're looking to do for companies is help them grow to a size where they actually need full-time executives that are replacing our fractionals. So when we look at an assignment, it is, how can we help this company grow? We're going to have an executive or fractional executives in that company. Again, it could be anywhere from a year to 3 years, but again, we want to help them grow to a sustainable size that they ultimately need a full-time executive in that seat. And so I wouldn't say that, we come into an organization, we fulfill one assignment, and then we walk away. We ultimately, again, want to transition our fractional, give them the ability to bring on a full-time executive and transfer that knowledge to their full-time executive. So ultimately, from a boardroom bullpen standpoint, that's how we view it.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is the flexibility of the model itself. So going through some of the examples that we've gone through today, is the beauty of what we're doing is you're not bringing in a full-time employee. So one, you don't have the significant financial investment of bringing somebody full-time, being constrained by that full-time employee, obviously the overhead for benefits and other costs of bringing somebody in. But our model actually allows for what I would say significant lift early. So when we're bringing somebody in, there's a very deep assessment of the existing situation in the organization. It's just the same as you would do if you had a needle mover full-time leader coming in. You're coming through, doing a full assessment of people, process, technology. You're really setting up a strategy that aligns to the vision of the organization, and you're putting together a strategic plan in order to fulfill that across kind of all those capabilities. And when you're developing that leader, as you move further into that timeline, they're able to then take on more and more of that responsibility as you're leveling them up. And so we can also and do ramp down the number of hours that our fractional leader is in the organization. So heavy lifting early, continue to kind of do that over a period of time until there's a stabilization in the organization, and then really starting to move into that role of what I would call more of a maintenance mode, until which a time we can all come to the conclusion that that person's truly ready to take on full responsibility in that seat in the organization. And so it's not here's a commitment for the next 2 years and you're committed to these many hours. It is, let's evaluate this on an ongoing basis. Let's identify what's really happening in the organization. Let's make changes as we see them, and let's do the right thing for the business and all the people involved. That level of flexibility is what I think makes what we do really unique. And the fact that we're not putting people into a box of this long-term contract that's so static that constrains the organization from doing what they really need to do and what makes the most sense for their success. And I think that's one of the things that really makes us unique, but also makes that fractional model and the way that we deliver it truly strategic leadership as a bridge, as described kind of at the beginning of the podcast today, really allows you to do that in a way that's meaningful and flexible to the needs of your business.
For our PE and VC listeners, how does your model create leverage without the overhead of a traditional operating partner arm? Open-ended here to Ted or Clint.
Yeah, my response to that would be, and it goes along with Clint's last statements. Ultimately, again, having been through, I guess been in the business world since 1997, and I don't want to say that companies have not always been cost conscious. I don't think that would be fair, but whether it's privately held, family owned, VC backed, PE backed company, I think just given the last years, especially when, you look at the business environment that's been out there, there has been this, harder look at, how can we reduce costs, continue to grow the company? And when you look at executives specifically, generally they're the highest paid people in the organization. And Clint's heard me make the argument that there should at least be one salesperson that's actually, and at least the target area that we're playing in, the $5 million to $100 million company, there should at least be one salesperson that is exceeding what the executive team is making. But that aside, I would say that cost conscious look has really gone to the executive level. And so are you in a company, you as the CEO, or you in a company where you actually have a fully filled out team? If you are they actually playing that as a full-time role? Because if not, and again, this is where we look at growth stage companies, does it make a lot more sense for you to bring in the fractional? And my answer to that would be, depending on the role, depending on the size of the company, more than likely you should have at least a fractional executive on your team. And to Clint's earlier point, look at what you have to pay them. You look at benefits, you look at taxes, and ultimately you look at time spent with the organization. Is it a full-time role for you? If you are looking to get in, or I should say, if you're looking for a specific executive, is that a full-time role? If it's not, ultimately a fractional is the perfect fit for what you're doing.
Yeah, a couple comments there as well. I think just if you see what has happened, I think Ted's comment is spot on, especially what we've seen. What I would say is kind of the corporate carnage over the last couple of years. I mean, it's not new, but it seems like it's accelerating at a pace that we have not seen in the past. In these kind of peaks and valleys of revenue generation, goals, profitability, expectations of investors is the oftentimes kind of quick trigger to, for lack of a better term, kind of gut a executive team in order to reduce cost. And to me, there's a couple of things that are really important to understand there, especially with organizations that are trying to be intentional about growing and growing over the long run, not just being short-term thinkers, is that your ability to sustain pace in your organization and to ultimately ascend to where you want to go requires a strong foundation and consistency of leadership. And if you're just going to lever up and lever down every time things get tough, it's going to be very difficult to create any sustainable success. One of the reasons why that happens is, I think, is a lack of discipline in organizations, that when things are going really well, that they make substantial investments in an executive leadership team, but not really assessing what the needs of the business are. What I think in particular, size of companies that we're generally working with, is there is always kind of two needs that are really important in any functional discipline in an organization. There's strategic planning, ideation, strategic plan, execution, leadership that's required for an organization to ascend. And that is a specific talent and expertise that is more rare than it is common. There's also always a need to execute, right in the forefront of the battleground. Somebody in sales or in marketing or operations or finance that has to do a lot of the doing. And there is a way to bring those things together as force multipliers, but you have to be mindful of, when you're building a team, do you need to invest 40 hours a week, 52 weeks out of the year into somebody? Are they really doing strategic leadership that many hours in a day? And I think this goes a little bit more to kind of more the evolution of the potential gig economy and how things may people start thinking a little bit differently around how you build an organization. But when you're growing and you're not a upper mid-market or even enterprise business, I would say it's very few and far between that you really need true certifiable, been there, done that, strategic executives in your organization, but you do need them in the room to help you ascend. And so the beauty of fractional model is bringing that leader in as a compelling part of your executive team to help guide the strategy, but then pairing them with somebody who's great at executing. And now you can make an investment that, for, in many cases, the same investment you would have made in a full-time CXO, whatever, fill in the blank in terms of what that role is, and then asking them to do stuff tactically that they're not good at, don't want to do, and really kind of prohibits the success of the organization. Now you actually get the growth that you want because you're making an investment, in the ROI, and those two roles together is a much better investment than overpaying somebody who's strategic to do a lot of busy work every week, right? And so that's, I think, a big thing that we're seeing in the size organizations that we're going after. The other thing that I would say, and I think one of the things that we wanted to kind of touch on today, and I'd love Ted to kind of join in on this, especially and his background and experience, is that what makes our model really interesting is that for private equity and VC firms, especially the ones that I would say there's a lot of new players kind of in the field today. So, early stage funds that are being created, they're, maybe in their first or second cohort, don't necessarily have like this large operating partner network that they've established. And it is painful, challenging, et cetera, because when they have needs kind of in the here and now. And then it becomes this process of, okay, like, let me go through my Rolodex, or are my operating partners even available? Are they already entrenched in all of the port codes that I already have? And I know we've used this term a few times recently, and in some ways I despise it, but in many ways I feel like this is kind of what we've tried to do. Is we really wanted to kind of create as close to as possible the easy button, that you make one phone call to what we're doing at Boardroom Bullpen. We already have capable, vetted executives ready to go who are looking for assignments. Doesn't matter what the role is in those top 6 C-suite roles. And then really taking like all that heavy lifting process off and getting somebody in a seat for you within a week, right? And giving you the ability to maintain your momentum in the organization. And so we really like how we're positioned in terms of supporting both private equity and VC firms because of the capabilities that we've built out. And I think Ted can lend some perspective on this as well, based on his experience. But I do think it's one of our uniques.
I would say specifically to when you look at PE firms, it's more operating partners. When you look at VC firms, it's more executive in residence, entrepreneur in residence. And historically, it's been the larger firms, your top 50, top 100 VCs out there that are lending that talent to their companies. What I've seen, just given the fact that, been doing this since 2000, is that as firms, again, look more at or become more budget conscious, it is less about hiring full-time talent, hiring a full-time executive team, which you definitely saw in the 2000s, the early 2000s, you saw after the financial crisis. And so, to Clint's point earlier, what makes more sense for these firms? And I agree. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we built the bullpen, was you can have that talent, anywhere 15, 20 years worth of knowledge in the space. Again, you get for a fraction of the price. You don't have the full-time overhead that goes along with that. Ultimately get that experience, build that team, grow it through the B, C round, where you can have that fully built out team. But the cost savings specifically from CFO's standpoint is significant. Plus you still get the talent that you would have gotten without the full-time salary.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note, it's not just the CFO role, right? It's any of the roles that we have. So, there are a lot of CFO firms out there. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot recently, I think sometimes people get caught up in, hey, you're another CFO firm. Well, actually, we're not. That is a part of our depth of talent, but we're actually built the top 6 roles because we recognize that all those roles are critical to the success of an organization. Everybody has different needs at different times. And so our focus in our organization was to be kind of that Johnny on the spot. You need a CTO, we've got it. You need a chief revenue officer, we've got it. You need a human resources leader, we've got it. And so while CFO is the most common, it's the one that I think people typically think about the most because it's been out there for the longest. All of these roles are critical to the success of an ascending organization. And oftentimes a lot of the other roles are ones that are very underinvested in too. So I know we tend to kind of lean into CFO, but oftentimes a company is really growing and they have still the person who was their one man or woman show in a sales role. That person doesn't know how to build out a outbound team, right? Or a telesales organization or a regional sales organization. They don't necessarily have the capability to do that. They maybe have somebody who's a technology specialist in kind of terms of where the organization was at that point in time. And now the organization is trying to scale, and the technology infrastructure required in order for that business to be really successful requires somebody who's built scalable technology. So I use those as examples. I mean, certainly on the human resources side, the fact that, really having a strategic people leader, it's not just about like keep me out of legal hot water. Like there's all kinds of people that can do that. But if you're trying to retain your talent, which is one of the most significant issues that most organizations deal with today because they don't have a leadership track for their folks. They don't have a way to cultivate culture. They don't have a way to develop the talent in the organization. They don't have a roadmap for ascending roles from entry level, upscale. Having a strategic HR leader is super important. So these are all things that we were super mindful of and why we built a deep team kind of across all of those roles. And all of them can be very critical to the ascension of an organization.
With that being said, what are the signals that it's time for a bullpen intervention in a portfolio company?
Obviously, it depends on the role, but if you look at an organization, you as the CEO of the company are recognizing weaknesses. You've had a leader in place, they've gotten you to a certain point. So let's just say they've helped you grow from, $5 to $20 million. Not everybody can level up with an organization. As you start to see your leading indicators dropping off in certain areas, that is one concrete way to see it. Ultimately, from a personality standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, if you're losing engagement from a leader, if things are starting to lag in that area, oftentimes another good indicator. And it's not to say that you shift that person out of the organization. There's probably a role for that person inside of the organization. It's just you can't always expect your current team to scale to where you want to go. The recognition of that up front, trying to coach them, trying to lead them, again, potentially finding someone that can come in and help them level up, a fractional executive as an example. Those are ways to ultimately see if they can fill that role. But I think you're looking at, again, kind of the leading indicators for each area, engagement from the current leader in that position. So those would be the two keys that I would put out there.
Yeah, and to say something that maybe some CEOs kind of in the our target market may not even like to hear. I think I've heard these statistics a few times before, and again, these are not necessarily a representation of 100% of the population, but there are real examples that kind of are out there in the ether around, even at the CEO levels. Companies that are founded and grown oftentimes are very homegrown, so they don't necessarily have a lot of experienced people on the ground of that business. So everybody's kind of growing in the business together, and that oftentimes happens in your traditional startup, even your family enterprise businesses that have been in business for 30 or 40 years. Oftentimes, there's data out there that says that many times there's a different CEO required from 0 to 10, from 10 to 50 to 50 to 100, 100 to 500, for example. That all of those elevations require a different person at the top of the organization. Most of these companies that are smaller, probably the most strategic visionary leader in the organization is actually the CEO. So if the fact is that in many cases there's a different level required of talent in the CEO seat, why would you not expect that you also need a different level of talent required in all those other seats in the organization as you're ascending? And so having the right people in the right seats is such a critical thing. It is largely one of the most significant constraints to growth of organizations. It is the commitment and loyalty and stubbornness that people have of trying to continue to expect that person can somehow become something that they're not. And willingness and capacity are the two things that I've always kind of said in my career. Like you have to have both. You can't have just one of the two and expect what you need. So recognition with that in your organization, being willing to make the tough decisions, to Ted's point, identifying the fact that there's still key people in your business that might have a seat on the bus, but maybe they're not the right person to move into that next level. They still can be critical to the success of your organization. Being willing to recognize that and put them in a position where they can be successful, put somebody else in another position that now is ascending in your business is so critical. And the fact that we have the talent kind of ready-made that can step in is such a jolt of kind of propulsion in the right direction for an organization, for those that are vulnerable and willing to make those decisions.
I guess the other thing that I would add to that, just to follow on Clint's point, as a CEO, if you're recognizing that they ultimately are not going to be a long-term fit on the executive team, that's a discussion that you should have once you recognize it. Help them understand, do you have the possibility to do it? Absolutely. Here's where you need to get as a leader. If that doesn't work out, here is the role that I see for you. Ultimately, is that going to make them happy? Are they going to continue to contribute? I think most employees will. I think they like the idea of, hey, this is where I am. This is where I'm going. The company is going to continue to grow. I'm going to be part of the success of the company. It's just going to be in a different role. Obviously, if they are not on board with that, that's when potentially a shift needs to be made from a personnel standpoint.
And on that note, Ted, how do you identify coachable junior talent and then accelerate their readiness to lead?
So, having played as an executive for, 20 plus years, I think a lot of it has to do with, first, what I would say is the attitude that they bring to the table. It's not expectation that they're going to ascend to another role. It's that they want to learn what that role entails. Obviously, bringing a positive attitude to the table when they're doing it, giving them assignments that may be a little bit over their head, and seeing how they work towards that goal, work towards that project, sitting down with them once it's been completed. What do you see as the positives of what you've done? Where is there improvement? And then ultimately making that assessment as a leader. Can they bring these things to the table? And it's not to say that, a VP of HR can't ascend to a CHR role. It is, ultimately, again, aptitude, attitude, and willingness to learn. Those are the three things that I'd look for in a coachable, someone that can rise up to that executive role.
Final thought, is the future of executive leadership fractional, embedded, or something entirely new?
I think it's a combination thereof. I think that I think organizations just need to think differently about how they build an executive team. I know we've talked about this a little bit during the course of the conversation today on where you need significant strategic leadership, the amount of time and energy that's required. That can be unique to a specific function in the organization. It can be very dependent on what industry that you're in. It can have a lot to do with the composition of your business and how you execute. So I think that in the relative, next 5 to 10 years, for example, I think we'll start to see more and more of a transition to what I would probably call is a hybrid style executive team, which is going to be a combination of fully committed, full-time employees who are in certain roles in the executive team within an organization, paired with part-time executives that are filling really strategic needs in the organization as well in order to provide strategic leadership in specific capabilities and functions. And so I think the idea that you are in different milestones of your organization, there's chapters in the journey, so to speak, is that companies will really start to grab hold of how you can take advantage of in different milestones of your business, different leadership is required, and then leveraging kind of these flexible talent solutions that exist out there in order to address those needs. So really right talent at the right time and utilizing kind of the capabilities that exist out in the marketplace to accelerate your business in a way that makes sense based on where you are in your journey.
100% agree with what Clint said. And, fractional CFOs were accepted more readily probably in the last 15 years. The reason for the expansion to HR, sales, marketing, technology, just to name a few of them, I think that will continue to be accepted. So it's to say that there is going to be growth in the fractional market. There will be growth within executive teams, again, bringing on fractional talent to do it until they grow to such a point. But I think that acceptance has started, again, outside of COO, CFO role. I think that has started, but I think over the next 10 years, we're going to continue to see it grow into, an earlier point both that Clint and I have made. Once they're to and it's different for every organization, whether it's 200 employees, $100 million in revenue, when they fill out the executive team on a full-time basis. I think, though, that companies are recognizing the talent that they can get, again, at a cheaper cost, and they want to bring that talent in to accelerate their growth. And I mean, again, that's why the bullpen was born, and that's what we feel like we bring to the table.
If you're a founder staring down scale or an investor looking for more leverage without more headcount, this conversation should serve as a powerful reminder. Strategic leadership isn't a luxury, it's infrastructure. With that, I'm Jason Carvello.
And I'm Clint Overton.
And I'm Ted Stan.
And we'll see you next time.